91%. That's how many Japanese carrier crew members were dead by August 1945. Not casualties, dead. For every 100 men who served on Japanese carriers, 9 survived the war. The Imperial Navy started with 10 fleet carriers. They ended with 0. Let me tell you the real story of how an entire naval culture committed suicide by mathematics. The Japanese started the war with the best carrier pilots in the world. Each one had over 800 hours of flight training. By 1944, new pilots got less than 50 hours. Why? Because Japan made a fatal decision. They never rotated experienced pilots home to train replacements. Every veteran stayed in combat until they died. And they all died. Here's the brutal arithmetic. At Midway, Japan lost 4 carriers and 322 aircraft. But here's what destroyed them. They lost 110 veteran pilots. Each one had over 2 years of training. Japan produced 200 new pilots per month. America produced 2,500. Do the math. Japan was dead before they knew it. But here's where it gets interesting. The carriers themselves were death traps by design. Japanese damage control doctrine was offensive spirit overcomes material weakness. They literally didn't train damage control. American carriers had firefighting schools. Japanese carriers had buckets. When the Taiho was hit by one torpedo, the crew didn't know to turn off ventilation. Aviation fuel vapors spread through the ship. 6 hours later, one spark turned the entire carrier into a 27,000-ton bomb. A survivor from the Shokaku described it. The American dive bombers came from the sun. 3 bombs. That's all. 3 bombs, and 20 minutes later, our carrier was gone. 1,360 men. The water was on fire. Those who escaped the ship burned in the ocean. Now let's talk about the numbers nobody discusses. Japanese carriers packed aircraft everywhere. In the hangars, on deck, in the passages. The Akagi carried 91 planes in space designed for 60. When one bomb penetrated to the hangar, it didn't destroy one plane. It destroyed 20. The chain reaction of exploding aircraft turned carriers into crematoriums. The real killer was Japanese carrier doctrine. They armed and fueled aircraft in enclosed hangars. Americans did it on deck. One bomb in a Japanese hangar meant every plane exploded in a confined space. At Midway, the Kaga took 4 bombs, 711 dead in 9 minutes. The survivors said the hangar deck turned into a blast furnace fed by aviation fuel. But perhaps the most insane statistic, Japanese carriers had no radar-directed anti-aircraft guns until 1944. They aimed manually at 400-mile-per-hour aircraft. Hit probability 2%. American carriers with radar-directed guns, 18%. That's not combat. That's mathematical suicide. Here's what sealed their fate. After losing 4 carriers at Midway, Japan had 6 fleet carriers left. In the next 2 years, they built 7 more. America built 90. Not a typo, 90. Japan launched 1 new carrier in 1944. America launched 19. The Japanese were fighting industrial capacity with human spirit. Spirit lost. The pilot training collapse was even worse. By 1944, American pilots got 300 hours of training, including 100 hours in operational aircraft. Japanese pilots got 30 hours total, mostly in gliders to save fuel. They couldn't land on carriers in calm seas, much less combat. At the Philippine Sea, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, Japan lost 3 carriers and 400 aircraft. But here's the devastating part. They lost 450 pilots. Only 43 were rescued. America lost 29 aircraft. The kill ratio was 13-1. That's not a battle. It's an execution. A captured Japanese naval officer admitted, "We knew after Midway. We knew we couldn't replace the pilots. Every carrier operation after that was a suicide mission. We just didn't call them that yet. The Shinano tells the whole story. The largest carrier ever built, 72,000 tons, sunk on her maiden voyage by 4 torpedoes from one submarine, 1,435 dead. The crew didn't know how to use damage control equipment. They had watertight doors that they didn't close. The pride of the Japanese Navy sank because nobody taught the crew basic damage control. Let's talk about the final carriers. By 1945, Japan was using converted battleships and cruise ships as carriers. The pilots couldn't actually land on them. They were one-way launch platforms for kamikaze attacks. The crew's job was to sail to launching range and die. Survival wasn't part of the mission profile. The last operational Japanese carrier, the Amagi, was destroyed at anchor by American aircraft. The crew was still aboard, waiting for aircraft that would never come, pilots who didn't exist, for a war already lost. Here's the final, darkest mathematics. Japan started with 3,500 trained carrier pilots. By war's end, 112 were alive. The carriers that revolutionized naval warfare became steel coffins for 25,000 sailors who believed offensive spirit could overcome mathematical reality. The Japanese carrier fleet didn't lose the war. It committed industrial seppuku, taking 91% of its men with it.